guys, this is Dr. Von Mad. We're back. I've already got a panel to glue this onto. I painted it with a little spiceberry red and wiped it out, but you've seen me do that a half a dozen times, so enough of that. That's gonna be the base for our snake, who's now out of the oven. He's still a little warm, but we're gonna work on it. As we all know, the initial color is always going to be black because white bleeds through. Other colors we're going to be using are territorial beige, pewter gray, white, vanilla ice cream, burnt sienna, standard brown, or real brown as they call it, gold sunset, burnt umber, and raw sienna. So let's get started. Now we're going to be using the big wide brush like this one because we're putting a base coat on. That base coat's going to be black. So this takes a little doing because you got a lot of nicks and nooks and crannies and stuff to try to get paint into. So you might have to do a little bit of kind of spackling like this with it to kind of get your paint in there. You also could maybe put a little paint on top and kind of work it in, which is also perfectly acceptable. Matter of fact, I'm going to grab a fair amount and just kind of paint it until I run out. Don't want to get so much that it deadens the effect of my tool work on it, but I need to be able to get enough into it that I can make it work. Now, there we go. We'll have to paint the underside separate because you can't paint both of them at once because, well, it's just the way it's set up. So, I'm kind of getting a bit of this paint and kind of coming in around it. Coming up underneath here. Because we're going to have to get the whole thing black before we can go any further. And most people don't know it, but before I built catapults, before I did video, before I painted, before I did anything, working with clay and sculpting, so you can actually see where there's some white sticking through, and you're going to have to probably go over a couple of coats to get rid of that. So you don't want any white spots sticking out. So as you turn it, you'll probably see some white bits, and you'll have to play whack-a-mole with them. See, right there's another one. I mean, now we're going to have to let that dry, and we'll come back to it when it does. Alright guys, we're back. This thing's still warm. You can actually see now maybe where some of the paint did not get into the cracks, so we're going to have to do this again. I'm going to grab a finer brush. See what I got. No, that's a stiff brush. I really do not want to use a stiff brush on this. Maybe. That's a little finer. It's still kind of a backdrop sort of brush, but we'll see if it'll work. So, see what we got going on here. So you can still actually see bits of white in it. So we're gonna see if this will get into those cracks and crevices. If not, I may need a different brush. And I'm not going to end up having to paint the underside after all because hey, I'm going to be putting it on a base. But I do need to get into these little nooks and crannies with my paint so we don't have little white dots poking out. So, like I said, this may take a little while. come around the bottom down here. See, that's why sometimes, I remember I said earlier I was going to have to probably do 2 or 3 coats of paint. Well, that's precisely why. And my painter's patch all over me. Because we've got places where this paint did not want to infiltrate. So I'm having to kind of hit it where I can hit it and see if I can get into these little divots. Sometimes I wonder if I couldn't find an acrylic spray paint that might do this base coat better than what I'm doing. We'll let that dry and see what kind of mischief that got us into. Now, we're going to go ahead and close this up. I've got some errands to run, and we'll let that dry, and I'll be back. Alright, guys. I don't know if I've got all the hollows out, but I think I got enough of them to make this work. So, what our next step is I'm going to go ahead and put the base coat on this guy. Now, for this, I'm going to be going from a darker color to a lighter color, mind you. So we're going to start with a little burnt umber. You know I like my burnt umber. I use it a lot. Now, it's not going to be a heavy coat, but it's going to be a moderate coat. And you're still going to be just kind of basically not wanting to coat it. See, that's a little much, actually. So I'll just use up what I got here and thin this paint out as I can. But, this should create some shade here. Because we're going to lighten this up. This is not the final color by any stretch. And that's probably going to have to set a minute because I used a lot of paint there. There we go. Get in here. Now, I know it doesn't seem like you can see much that I've done with it yet, but it should work itself out now. And so you can see that's a very light coat of paint. Now, I think I've got a thin enough coat on it using only just that one squirt to kind of go ahead and put another lighter coat on top of it. And I'm going to use a little less paint this time. So we go from this color here, from burnt umber to burnt sienna. Either that or, let's see. Actually, I think I'm going to go from, that's not burnt sienna. I'm going to go from burnt sienna to real brown, and I'm going to use just a little less paint. And what I'm wanting to do is layer my colors up. I'm going to wash off my brush. Now, you have to kind of slap your brush down just a hair, so I don't want a bunch. Now, see, I got too much on there right now. That's a little much. So I'm going to have to come over here and we'll see if I can scrape some of this back off into my paint bottle. Maybe get me a kind of, just rub it along your rag a little bit. You just barely want to kiss this thing. And it's going to be a real subtle color because right now it's still a little bit damp. So it's going to mix with this brown just a hair with the burnt umber. Just a hair. And kind of get in underneath here, underneath his chin. There we go. Now, Come around to the tail. As you can see, I got the rattle tucked in underneath. Now, see how dry this paint is. I'm going to touch someplace that's not particularly important. We're going to go in with a little bit of burnt umber, or burnt sienna, which is a slightly richer, kind of a reddish brown tone for this. And I'll use even less paint than I used just a second ago. So I'm just going to barely grab any. I'm going to kind of brush this along my work surface. May get a little bit more than that, because I don't want a whole bunch, but may have to let it dry a piece before I add this on. But you can see the color slowly lightening up. I may have to let it dry. We're going to let that dry a few minutes. So I'll be back. Alright guys, I let it dry a few minutes. I didn't put a whole lot, so it did dry off pretty quickly. We're going to go ahead and add another lighter coat in on top of this, and using even less paint. Said it's an involved process. Where is my brush? Put it in here. There it is. Now this is going to use even less paint than I did with the burnt sienna. We're going to use a little bit of raw sienna. So let me get my brush dried off here. Grab some of this here raw sienna. I don't need a whole bunch, just a little bit. Kind of. Now, see if this works. Hopefully it's not too dry or too wet still. It shouldn't be, but you never know. Starting to lighten up a piece, so maybe we're doing this right. A little bit up here. Barely want to kiss it with the paint. What you're trying to do is bring out the details. And right now it's still very, very dark. Now you can't probably see it. I'm hoping maybe you can, but it's definitely lightening up a piece. Now, I'm going to grab, because like I said, using that little amount of paint, it dries pretty quickly. We're going to try a little territorial beige now. So we're going to barely kiss this, kind of get this on here, and now we're starting to get some color. I'll probably go over it with a bit of I think I ended up using some gloss when I needed to use a little matte. That happens, though. I do that a lot. I end up using the two interchangeably. Not exactly good artistic form, but that's just me. And it's, honestly, it's not served me badly to do so. So, no. I'll probably have to add a little bit of white to this to kind of I may end up having to get my palette out here. Do I have a palette? Yes, we do. We have a palette. And I'm going to add a little white to this and kind of lighten it just a hair. So I'm going to go ahead and open this paint up here because I've been just kind of unscrewing the cap on it. We're going to add a little bit of this Territorial Beige and a pinch of this vanilla ice cream coloring. Oh, it didn't. Well, it leaked a little bit. It's my paint's trying to separate, but it should lighten it just a hair, and that's kind of what I'm after. Lighten it just a little bit from where it was. So I'm gonna go ahead and dry brush this off. Now, oh yeah, much better. Now, by now, hopefully you're able to see some color. I'm going to see if this will do this without blinding you. Let's see how this looks from here. That's a little dark, but hopefully you can still see. I'm going to try to get it to where you can. And I'll try to hold it up where I can to see it, to make sure you can see what I'm doing here. See? The color is starting to pop now. And I'll probably use maybe a little bit of, yeah, that color's starting to come out nicely now. Alright, now, we're going to add a pinch of this Golden Sunset, because we need just a little bit of that in it. So we're going to add just a pinch, like that. Now let's mix this color shade up and see what we get. Oh yeah, that's much more of a, kind of a, and we'll see how this turns out. Done a lot of these. Sometimes they turn out great. Sometimes, no matter what you do, it's not going to work. I don't know. Maybe it's the humidity or something. Now, that should do it for the coloring. But now we're going to have to come in and I'm going to use a slightly finer point brush to do some of the detail work. The tail particularly. So we're going to come in with a little black. And I'll paint some of the scales up. And we should start to see some patterns coming in now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to grab some of this here. Just kind of turn him around so I can see over the top of him. Kind of, because it's going to be kind of right in there. Trying to get this sort of a chevron-y pattern. So the Timber Rattler's got a unique color scheme to him. This part we will have to let dry pretty good. So, but I'm going to get these details onto it first. Just kind of touch it right up in here. I need it to look like it's got some body to it. And You should be able to see it as I'm turning it around, hopefully. I'm going to have to come in underneath it here. So I'll have to grab a little more black paint. We'll make these bands slightly wider as you get towards the tail, because the tail of a timber rattler is in fact kind of a, it actually turns black towards the end. We're getting down to where this thing should all be black from here down. After this one right here, it'll start to blacken out. And we'll have to kind of go over this with a little bit of gray just to kind of make the colors pop on it. There we go. Now, let's take a look at our picture if if my tablet's not out of commission here. Where's my buttons on this thing? There it is. Oh, we still got enough power to look at it. Alright. Alright. We do have a little bit of white around the scales, around the pattern, and that's going to lend us a little bit of a stark color pattern, and I need to pick up my paint rag. It just fell off on the floor. Now, hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing thus far. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and, where did I put my brushes? Oh yeah, there they are. I see them. Not bad. Alright, now let's put the paintbrush up here. I'm going to grab a smaller point. I need a little pinpointer brush here, like this guy right here. Right there. Now, I'm going to use a little vanilla ice cream because you find that true white and true black don't exist very often in nature. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come up here around the, just kind of, barely touch it. There we go. Now, that's definitely going to bring some color to this party. That's a good thing. So, it's been a long time since I've done any kind of rattlesnakes. But I'd say that's coming off nicely. See. Then we'll have to pay particular attention to the head. Because we'll let the rest of this dry while we're doing that. paint. So, no, it don't seem like I talk a lot. I'm just kind of, like I said, if you're doing this, you got to kind of be concentrating on it. So, I don't know. Let's see how this looks from this angle. I'm not quite done putting patterns on it, but oh yeah, that's coming all across nicely. Now, let's bring this around. Now, there we go. Now, let's rinse off my brush and then we can put on the eyes. So let's take a look at our eyes. Now, as eyes blend in a little piece, I'm going to end up using a little bit of Golden Sunset. Because simply put, while the eyes blend in a little bit, I'm going to use a little bit of artistic license here, and because I want the eyes to stand out. And it's not going to stand out a whole lot, but I want it to stand out somewhat. And so we'll turn him around. That's going to have to dry before I can do anything. I might put a little bit of a... That's looking actually quite good. Now, we're going to let that dry a few minutes before I put on the next coat. But I am going to go ahead and I'll stop for right now. And we'll finish this one. I'm going to let his pattern dry so that I don't smudge it up. So I'll be back here shortly.